Hey everyone, I'm here to help you relax and drift off tonight. If you enjoy using these videos to fall asleep, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more calming content. Share where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'd love to know. Now settle into a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's start unwinding together. In a remote village nestled deep within a snow-covered valley, there existed a legend about a lantern unlike any other. This lantern, known as the Frostfire Lantern, was said to burn with a cold blue flame that neither warmed nor illuminated in the way ordinary fire did. Instead, its light revealed hidden truths, shadows of the past, whispers of the future, and secrets buried deep within the soul. The lantern was both a marvel and a mystery, a relic of an ancient time when magic still walked the earth. The Frostfire Lantern was kept in the village's oldest temple, a crumbling structure of stone and ice that stood at the edge of the forest. It was guarded by a solitary monk, an elderly man named Brother Alden, who had dedicated his life to understanding the lantern's power. The villagers revered the lantern, but they also feared it. For while its light could reveal great truths, it could also expose terrible secrets, secrets that some would rather keep buried. The story begins with a young woman named Alara, who had grown up hearing tales of the Frostfire Lantern. Her mother, a storyteller of great renown, had often spoken of it, her words painting vivid pictures of its icy flame and the mysteries it held. Alara had always been fascinated by the lantern, but she had never seen it. The temple was forbidden to all but the monk, and even the bravest villagers dared not venture near it. But Alara was not like the others. She was curious and headstrong, with a thirst for knowledge that often led her into trouble. When her mother fell ill with a sickness that no healer could cure, Alara's thoughts turned to the lantern. She had heard stories of its power to reveal hidden truths, and she wondered if it could show her a way to save her mother. One night, when the moon was full and the village was asleep, Alara made her way to the temple. The snow crunched beneath her feet, and the cold wind bit at her skin. But she pressed on, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The temple loomed before her, its stone walls covered in ice, and its wooden doors weathered with age. Alara pushed the doors open, their hinges creaking in protest, and stepped inside. The air was cold and still, and the only light came from the lantern, which hung from the ceiling in the center of the room. Its flame burned with a cold blue light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Brother Alden stood before the lantern, his back to Alara. He was an old man, his face lined with age and his robes tattered and worn. But his eyes, when he turned to face her, were sharp and piercing. "You should not be here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I need your help," Alara replied, her voice trembling. "My mother is dying, and I don't know what to do. I thought the lantern might show me a way to save her." Brother Alden studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "The lantern's power is not to be taken lightly. It reveals truths, but those truths can be dangerous. Are you prepared to face what it might show you?" Alara hesitated, then nodded. "I have to try." Brother Alden led her to the lantern, its cold flame flickering softly. He handed her a small silver key. "This will unlock the lantern's power, but remember, once you look into its light, there is no turning back." Alara took the key, her hands trembling, and inserted it into the base of the lantern. The flame flared, its blue light growing brighter and colder. She felt a strange sensation, as if the light were reaching into her, pulling at her thoughts and memories. Then the visions began. She saw her mother lying in bed, her face pale and her breathing shallow. But she also saw something else, a shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed, its form shifting and indistinct. The figure reached out, its hand hovering over her mother's chest, and Alara felt a chill run down her spine. The vision shifted, and she saw herself, older and wearier, standing in a snow-covered field. The lantern was in her hands, its flame burning brightly, but the light seemed to be consuming her. Her skin was pale and translucent, and her eyes were filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. Then the vision faded, and Alara was back in the temple, the lantern's flame flickering softly. She turned to Brother Alden, her heart racing. "What does it mean?" "The lantern shows what is, what was, and what may be," he replied. "The figure you saw is a spirit drawn to your mother's sickness. It feeds on her life force, and unless it is stopped, she will die." "How do I stop it?" Alara asked, her voice desperate. Brother Alden hesitated, then said, "The lantern's flame can banish the spirit, but it will come at a cost. The flame is tied to your life force. To use it, you must give a part of yourself." Ilara's heart sank. She had hoped for an easy answer, but she should have known better. The lantern's power came with a price, and she would have to pay it. Ilara returned home, the lantern clutched tightly in her hands. Her mother's condition had worsened, and her breathing was shallow and labored. Ilara placed the lantern at the foot of the bed, its cold flame casting an eerie light over the room. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding, and reached out to the flame. As her fingers brushed against it, she felt a sharp pain, as if the cold were seeping into her very soul. The flame flared, its light growing brighter and colder, and the shadowy figure appeared once more. The spirit turned to her, its form shifting and writhing, and let out a low, guttural growl. Ilara stood her ground, her hands trembling, but her resolve unwavering. "Leave her," she said, her voice steady. "You can't have her." The spirit lunged at her, its form dissolving into a cloud of darkness. Ilara raised the lantern, its flame flaring brightly, and the spirit let out a piercing scream. The light consumed it, banishing it to the shadows, and the room fell silent. But the cost was great. Ilara felt a deep, aching cold spread through her body, and her vision blurred. She collapsed to the floor, the lantern slipping from her hands, and everything went dark. When Ilara awoke, she was lying in bed, her mother sitting beside her. The lantern was gone, its flame extinguished, and the room was filled with the warm light of the morning sun. "You saved me," her mother said, her voice filled with gratitude and sorrow. "But at what cost?" Ilara tried to sit up, but her body felt weak and heavy. She looked at her hands, her skin pale and translucent, and knew that the lantern had taken something from her, a part of her life force, her vitality. She had saved her mother, but she had paid a price she could never reclaim. The Frostfire lantern was returned to the temple, its flame dormant once more. Brother Alden placed it back in its place, his expression grim. "The lantern's power is not to be taken lightly," he said, his voice low. "It reveals truths, but those truths come at a cost." Ilara never fully recovered from her encounter with the lantern. She was weaker, her body frail, and her spirit heavy with the weight of what she had done. But she had no regrets. She had saved her mother, and that was enough. The lantern remained in the temple, its cold flame waiting for the next soul brave enough to seek its power. And though its light could reveal great truths, it was also a reminder of the cost of knowledge, of the sacrifices we make for those we love, and the price we pay for the secrets we uncover. For in the end, the Frostfire lantern was not just a relic of magic, but a testament to the enduring power of love, courage, and the human spirit. In a small, secluded village surrounded by dense forests and misty hills, there was a legend about a doll, a porcelain figure with glassy eyes and a faint, unsettling smile. The doll, known as Annalise, was said to have been crafted by a toy maker who had lost his daughter to a terrible illness. In his grief, he had poured his soul into the doll, imbuing it with a strange and terrible power. Annalise could grant wishes, but each wish came at a terrible cost. The doll was both a blessing and a curse, a relic of love and loss that had haunted the village for generations. The doll was kept in a locked chest in the attic of the village elder's home, brought out only in times of desperate need. Those who sought its power were warned of the consequences, but desperation has a way of clouding judgment. Over the years, many had made wishes, and many had paid the price. Some lost their wealth, others their health, and a few their very lives. But the doll remained, its glassy eyes staring out from the darkness, waiting for the next soul to make a wish. The story begins with a young woman named Clara, who had grown up hearing the tales of Annalise. Her grandmother, a wise and cautious woman, had often warned her about the doll. "It's not a toy," she would say. "It's a test, and it's a test no one ever passes." But Clara was not one to heed warnings. She was headstrong and curious, with a thirst for adventure that often led her into trouble. When her younger brother Thomas fell ill with a fever that no healer could cure, Clara's thoughts turned to the doll. She had tried everything, herbs, potions, prayers, but nothing worked. Thomas was growing weaker by the day, and Clara was desperate. One night when the moon was full and the village was asleep, Clara crept into the elder's home. She found the chest in the attic, its surface covered in dust and cobwebs. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, nestled in a bed of faded velvet, was Annalise. The doll was smaller than Clara had imagined, its porcelain face pale and delicate. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow her as she lifted it from the chest, and its faint smile sent a shiver down her spine. But Clara pushed her fear aside. She had come too far to turn back now. "Annalise," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I wish for my brother to be healed. Please save him." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the doll's eyes seemed to glow, and a cold wind swept through the attic. Clara felt a strange sensation, as if something had been pulled from her chest. She stumbled back, clutching the doll tightly, and then everything went black. When Clara awoke, she was lying on the floor of the attic, the doll still in her hands. The chest was closed and the room was silent. She felt a strange emptiness, as if a part of her had been taken, but she pushed the feeling aside. All that mattered was Thomas. She rushed home, her heart filled with hope. When she entered her brother's room, she found him sitting up in bed, his fever gone and his color restored. He smiled at her, his eyes bright with life. "Clara," he said, his voice weak but steady, "I feel better." Clara's heart swelled with relief. The doll had worked. Thomas was healed. But as the days passed, Clara began to notice strange things. The villagers avoided her, their eyes filled with fear and suspicion. Her grandmother refused to speak to her, and even Thomas seemed distant, as if he no longer recognized her. Clara felt a growing sense of unease, but she couldn't understand why. Then one night she had a dream. She was standing in a dark forest, the trees twisted and gnarled. In the distance, she saw a figure, a young girl with pale skin and glassy eyes. The girl smiled, her expression eerily familiar, and beckoned Clara forward. When Clara woke, she knew what had happened. The doll had taken something from her, not just a part of her soul, but her place in the world. She was no longer Clara, the sister, the granddaughter, the friend. She was Clara, the girl who had made a wish, and the doll was not done with her. Desperate to undo what she had done, Clara returned to the elder's home. She found the chest in the attic and placed the doll inside, her hands trembling. "I wish to take it back," she whispered. "I wish to undo my wish." The doll's eyes glowed once more, and the cold wind returned. Clara felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something had been ripped away. She fell to her knees, gasping for breath, and when she looked up, the doll was gone. But the damage had been done. Thomas's fever returned, worse than before, and Clara's emptiness grew. She had tried to cheat the doll, and it had taken more from her in return. She was a shadow of her former self, her spirit broken, and her heart heavy with regret. The doll reappeared in the chest, its glassy eyes staring out from the darkness, waiting for the next soul to make a wish. And though Clara tried to warn others, her words fell on deaf ears. Desperation has a way of clouding judgment, and the doll's power was too tempting for some to resist. Over the years, many more wishes were made, and many more prices were paid. The doll's legend grew, its name whispered in fear and reverence. But Clara never forgot the lesson she had learned. The doll was not a gift, but a curse, a reminder that every wish comes with a cost, and that some prices are too high to pay. And so, the cursed doll remained, its porcelain face pale and delicate, its glassy eyes filled with secrets. It was a relic of love and loss, of hope and despair, and its power would endure as long as there were those desperate enough to make a wish. For in the end, the doll was not just a test, but a mirror, a reflection of the human heart, with all its longing, its courage, and its folly. In a quiet, fog-drenched village nestled between jagged cliffs and a restless sea, there existed a peculiar artifact known as the Mask of Final Hours. It was an ancient relic, older than the village itself, and it was said to hold a power both wondrous and terrible. The mask, carved from a single piece of obsidian, was smooth and featureless, save for two narrow slits for the eyes. When worn, it revealed the final moments of its wearer's life, a vision of their death, vivid and unrelenting. Some called it a curse, others a gift, but all agreed that it was not to be trifled with. The mask had been passed down through generations, kept hidden in the attic of the village elder's home. It was brought out only on rare occasions when someone was brave or foolish enough to seek its wisdom. Those who wore it often emerged changed, their faces pale and their eyes haunted. Some claimed it had saved their lives, allowing them to avoid the fate it had shown them. Others were driven mad by what they saw, their minds unable to reconcile the inevitability of their end. But no matter the outcome, the mask was always returned to its place, waiting for the next soul to dare its power. The story begins with a young woman named Alara, who had returned to the village after years of living in the city. She had come back to care for her ailing father, a fisherman who had spent his life battling the sea. Alara had always been a curious and headstrong child, and her time in the city had only deepened her thirst for knowledge. She had studied history, philosophy, and the occult, and when she heard of the Mask of Final Hours, she was immediately intrigued. Her father, however, was less enthusiastic. "That mask is not a toy," he warned her, his voice trembling with age and exhaustion. "It shows you things you can't unsee. It's not worth the risk." But Alara was undeterred. She had always been fascinated by the idea of fate, of whether the future was set in stone or could be changed. The mask, with its ability to reveal the moment of one's death, seemed like the ultimate test of that question. She had to know. One stormy night, when the wind howled through the village and the waves crashed against the cliffs, Alara made her way to the elder's home. The elder, a wizened woman named Marin, greeted her with a knowing look. "You've come for the mask," she said, her voice as steady as the tides. Alara nodded. "I need to know what it will show me." Marin studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Very well, but remember, the mask does not lie. What you see will come to pass, one way or another." She led Alara to a small, dimly lit room in the attic. The mask sat on a pedestal, its surface gleaming in the flickering light of a single candle. Alara approached it cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the smooth obsidian, and felt a strange warmth emanating from it. Taking a deep breath, she lifted the mask and placed it over her face. The world around her dissolved, replaced by a swirling void of darkness. Alara felt herself being pulled forward, as if by an unseen force, until she was standing in a place she did not recognize. It was a rocky shore, the waves crashing violently against the cliffs. The sky was a deep, angry red, and the air was thick with the scent of salt and decay. She saw herself, older and wearier, standing at the edge of the cliff. Her hair was streaked with gray, and her face was lined with the weight of years. In her hand, she held a lantern, its light flickering weakly against the storm. She was shouting something, her voice lost in the wind, and her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Then she saw it, a massive wave, taller than any she had ever seen, rising from the sea. It loomed over her, its surface glistening like liquid glass, and she knew there was no escape. The wave crashed down, swallowing her in an instant, and the vision went dark. Alara tore the mask from her face, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was back in the attic, the candle still flickering on the pedestal. But the vision lingered in her mind, vivid and unshakable. Marin placed a hand on her shoulder, her touch grounding. "What did you see?" Ilara told her, her voice trembling. "I saw myself, older, on the cliffs. A wave. It took me." Marin nodded, her expression grave. "The mask shows the truth, but it does not dictate it. What you do with that knowledge is up to you." Ilara spent the next few days in a daze, the vision haunting her every thought. She tried to convince herself that it was just a possibility, not a certainty. But the mask's power was undeniable, and she knew that what she had seen would come to pass, unless she could change it. Years went by, and Alara did everything in her power to avoid the fate the mask had shown her. She moved inland, far from the sea, and built a life for herself in the city. She married, had children, and found success in her work. But no matter how far she went, the vision stayed with her, a shadow lurking at the edges of her mind. Then one day she received word that her father had passed away. She returned to the village for his funeral, her heart heavy with grief. As she stood by his grave, she felt a strange pull, a longing she could not explain. She knew what it was, the sea calling her back. Against her better judgment, Ilara found herself standing on the cliffs, the wind whipping through her hair. She was older now, just as she had been in the vision, and the weight of years pressed heavily on her shoulders. She held a lantern in her hand, its light flickering weakly against the storm. And then she saw it, the wave rising from the sea like a monstrous beast. It loomed over her, its surface glistening like liquid glass, and she knew there was no escape. But this time, she did not feel fear. She felt peace. The wave crashed down, swallowing her in an instant. But as the water closed over her, she saw something, a light, warm and golden, beckoning her forward. She reached for it, and in that moment, she understood. The mask had not shown her a curse, but a gift. It had shown her the moment she would find peace, the moment she would be free. The mask of final hours was returned to its place in the attic, waiting for the next soul to dare its power. And though its visions were often feared, they were also revered. For in the end, the mask was not just a harbinger of death, but a reminder of life, of the moments that define us, the choices we make, and the peace that awaits us all. And as long as it existed, its secrets would endure, a testament to the power of fate, courage, and the enduring human spirit. Deep within an uncharted forest, hidden by towering trees and veiled in perpetual mist, lay a maze unlike any other. Its walls were made of living hedges, their leaves of vibrant green that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The maze was vast, stretching for miles in every direction, and its paths were said to lead to places beyond imagination. But what made the maze truly extraordinary was its ability to reshape itself. Every hour, as if guided by some unseen force, its walls would shift, its paths would change, and its secrets would be reborn. Those who entered the maze rarely returned. And those who did spoke of impossible wonders and unspeakable horrors. The maze had no name, for it was older than memory. It was said to have been created by an ancient civilization, a people who had mastered the art of bending nature to their will. They had built the maze as a test, a trial of wit, courage, and resilience. But over time, the maze had taken on a life of its own, becoming a living, breathing entity that defied explanation. It was a place of mystery and danger, a labyrinth that challenged not only the body, but also the mind and soul. The story begins with a young man named Kyle, who had grown up on the outskirts of the forest. He had always been fascinated by the maze, its legend a constant presence in his life. His grandmother, a storyteller of great renown, had often spoken of it, her words painting vivid pictures of its wonders and terrors. "The maze is alive," she would say. "It thinks, it feels, it chooses, and it only reveals its secrets to those who are worthy." Kyle had always dreamed of entering the maze, of proving himself worthy of its challenges, but he had never had the courage until the day his sister Lyra fell ill. The village healers could do nothing for her, and Kyle, desperate to save her, remembered a story his grandmother had told him. Deep within the maze there was said to be a flower, a rare, luminous bloom that could cure any ailment. It was a long shot, but it was the only hope he had. With a heavy heart and a determined spirit, Kale set out for the maze. He carried with him a small satchel of supplies, a map of the forest, though it did not include the maze, and a pendant that had belonged to his grandmother. The pendant was a simple thing, a silver disc engraved with a spiral, but it gave him comfort. It was a reminder of the stories, of the courage that had been passed down through generations. When Kale reached the maze, he was struck by its sheer size. The hedges rose high above him, their tops disappearing into the mist. The entrance was a narrow gap between two walls, its edges lined with flowers that seemed to glow faintly. Taking a deep breath, Kyle stepped inside. The air within the maze was cool and damp, and the silence was almost oppressive. Kyle could hear the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds, but there was no other sound. He began to walk, his footsteps echoing softly on the dirt path. The walls of the maze were so close that he could reach out and touch them, their leaves brushing against his fingers. At first, the maze seemed straightforward. The paths were clear, and Kyle made steady progress. But as he ventured deeper, he began to notice strange things. The walls seemed to shift ever so slightly, as if they were alive. The paths branched off in unexpected directions, and landmarks he had noted earlier seemed to disappear. It was as if the maze was playing with him, testing his resolve. Then as the hour struck, the maze changed. Kale felt a faint tremor beneath his feet, and the walls began to move. The hedges twisted and turned, their branches intertwining to form new paths and block old ones. Kale watched in awe and terror as the maze reshaped itself, its layout completely transformed in a matter of seconds. When the movement stopped, he was no longer sure where he was. The path ahead was unfamiliar, and the landmarks he had relied on were gone. Kale pressed on, his determination unwavering. He knew that the maze would continue to change, that he would have to adapt to its whims, but he also knew that he could not give up. His sister's life depended on him. As he walked, he encountered strange and wondrous things. He found a clearing filled with flowers that sang in harmony, their petals glowing with a soft, golden light. He crossed a bridge made of vines, its surface swaying gently beneath his feet, and he stumbled upon a pool of water so clear that it reflected not his face, but his deepest desires. But the maze was not without its dangers. Kale encountered traps, pits hidden beneath leaves, walls that closed in on him, and illusions designed to lead him astray. He faced his fears, his doubts, and his regrets, each challenge forcing him to confront a part of himself he had long ignored. Hours turned into days, and Kale lost track of time. The maze seemed endless, its paths twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. But just as he began to lose hope, he found it, the flower. It was nestled in a small alcove, its petals a brilliant blue that seemed to pulse with life. Kel approached it cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. As he reached out to pluck it, he heard a voice. "Why do you seek the flower?" Kel turned to see a figure standing behind him, a woman made of leaves and vines, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She was the spirit of the maze, its guardian and guide. "I seek it to save my sister," Cal replied, his voice steady. "She is ill, and this is the only way to cure her." The spirit studied him for a long moment. "The maze has tested you, and you have proven yourself worthy. But know this, the flower comes at a price. To take it, you must leave something behind." Kel hesitated. "What must I leave?" "A memory," the spirit said. "A part of yourself. Choose wisely." Cal thought for a moment, then nodded. "Take my fear," he said. "The fear that has held me back, that has kept me from living fully." The spirit smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "It is done." Cal took the flower and made his way out of the maze, its paths shifting one final time to guide him to the exit. When he emerged, he felt lighter, freer, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He returned to the village and used the flower to cure his sister, its magic working just as the stories had said. But the maze was not done with him. Though he had left it behind, its lessons stayed with him, shaping him in ways he could not have imagined. He had faced its challenges and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. And though he never returned to the maze, he knew that it would always be a part of him, a reminder of the journey he had undertaken and the courage he had found within himself. The maze continued to reshape itself, hour by hour, day by day, waiting for the next soul brave enough to enter its depths. For it was not just a test, but a teacher, a labyrinth of life, love, and the endless pursuit of meaning. And as long as it stood, its secrets would endure, a testament to the power of the human spirit and the mysteries that lie beyond the known world. In the heart of a forgotten village, perched atop a hill shrouded in mist, stood an ancient bell tower. The tower was made of weathered stone, its surface covered in moss and ivy, and its bell, a massive bronze relic, hung silently, untouched for generations. The villagers called it the Bell of Echoes, and it was said to possess a strange and ominous power. It rang only when it was too late. The legend of the bell had been passed down through the ages, a cautionary tale told to children and whispered among adults. It was said that the bell had been forged by a blacksmith who had lost everything he loved, his family, his home, his hope. In his grief, he had poured his soul into the bell, imbuing it with a curse. It would remain silent, no matter how hard it was struck, until a moment of great tragedy was imminent. And when it rang, its toll would echo across the village, a mournful sound that signaled the arrival of sorrow. For centuries, the bell had remained silent. The villagers had grown complacent, dismissing the legend as mere superstition. But deep down, they knew the truth. The bell was a reminder of their fragility, a symbol of the inevitability of loss. And though they tried to forget it, the tower loomed over the village, a silent sentinel watching over their lives. The story begins with a young woman named Lila, who had returned to the village after years of living in the city. She had come back to care for her ailing grandmother, a wise woman named Marin, who was the keeper of the village's stories. Marin had always been fascinated by the bell, and she had often told Lila tales of its history and power. "The bell is not just a curse," Marin would say. "It's a warning, a chance to prepare, to say goodbye, to make peace. But it's also a reminder that we cannot control everything. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we cannot stop what is meant to be." Lila had always found the stories unsettling, but she had never truly believed in the bell's power. That changed one fateful night. It was a quiet evening. the kind where the air feels heavy and the world seems to hold its breath. Lila was sitting by her grandmother's bedside, reading to her from an old book of folk tales. Marin had been growing weaker by the day, and Lila knew that her time was near, but she refused to give up hope. She had spent weeks searching for a cure, consulting healers and herbalists, but nothing had worked. Still, she clung to the belief that her grandmother would recover. As the hours passed, the wind began to pick up, rattling the windows and howling through the trees. Leela glanced outside, her heart skipping a beat. The bell tower was visible from the window, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of light coming from the tower, but she dismissed it as a trick of the shadows. Then it happened. A deep, resonant toll echoed through the village, its sound so powerful that it seemed to shake the very ground. Lila froze, her blood turning to ice. The bell, it was ringing. She rushed to the window, her eyes fixed on the tower. The bell was swinging back and forth, its movements slow and deliberate. Each toll sent a wave of dread through her, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that something terrible was about to happen. The villagers emerged from their homes, their faces pale with fear. They gathered in the square, their eyes drawn to the tower. No one had ever heard the bell ring before, but they all knew what it meant. The air was thick with tension, and the silence between tolls was deafening. Lila ran to the square, her heart pounding. She searched the crowd for her grandmother, but Marin was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in, and she sprinted back to the house, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. When she arrived, she found Marin lying still in her bed, her eyes closed and her breathing shallow. Leela knelt beside her, clutching her hand. "Grandmother, please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Don't leave me." Marin's eyes fluttered open, and she smiled weakly. "The bell," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's time." "No," Lila pleaded. "There has to be something I can do. I can't lose you." Marin reached up, her hands trembling as she cupped Lila's cheek. "You can't stop what's meant to be, my dear. But you can carry on. Remember the stories. Remember me." Lila sobbed, her heart breaking as she realized the truth. The bell had rung for her grandmother. It was too late. Marin passed away that night, her final breath a whisper of love. The bell fell silent, its tolls fading into the night. But the village was forever changed. The ringing of the bell had shattered their complacency, reminding them of the fragility of life and the inevitability of loss. In the days that followed, Lila found herself drawn to the bell tower. She climbed the crumbling stairs, her footsteps echoing in the empty space, until she reached the top. The bell hung before her, its surface etched with ancient runes. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold metal, and for a moment she felt a connection to her grandmother, to the village, to the countless souls who had come before her. She realized then that the bell was not just a curse, it was a gift, a chance to say goodbye, to make peace, to remember. And though it rang only when it was too late, its tolls carried with them a message of hope. Life was fleeting, but the memories, the stories, the love, those would endure. Lila became the keeper of the village's stories, just as her grandmother had been. She told the tale of the Bell of Echoes to anyone who would listen, ensuring that its legend would never be forgotten. And though the bell remained silent for years to come, its presence was a constant reminder of the lessons it had taught. For in the end, the bell was not just a harbinger of sorrow, it was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. And as long as the villagers remembered, its tolls would echo in their hearts, a reminder to cherish every moment, to love deeply, and to live fully. For when the bell rang, it was too late. But until then, there was still time. In the heart of a forgotten library, Hidden deep within the winding streets of an ancient city, there existed a book unlike any other. Its cover was made of worn, cracked leather, and its pages were yellowed with age. The title, etched in faded gold lettering, read, "The Lexicon of Lethe." It was said that the book held the power to erase memories, not just the trivial ones, like the name of a childhood friend or the taste of a favorite meal, but the deep, foundational memories that shaped who a person was. Those who read it would forget their past, their identity, even their very sense of self. It was a book of both wonder and terror, a relic of a time when magic and mystery walked hand in hand. The library, known as the Athenaeum of Echoes, was a place of quiet reverence. Its shelves stretched endlessly, filled with books that whispered secrets to those who dared to listen. But the lexicon of Lethe was kept apart, locked in a glass case in the darkest corner of the library. It was guarded by a lone librarian, an elderly man named Elias, who had dedicated his life to protecting the book from those who might misuse it. The book was both a treasure and a curse, a reminder of the power of knowledge and the cost of forgetting. The story begins with a young scholar named Lila, who had spent her life searching for the lexicon of Lethe. She had grown up hearing tales of the book from her grandfather, a historian who had dedicated his life to studying ancient texts. He had spoken of the book with a mixture of awe and fear, warning her of its dangers, but also sparking her curiosity. When her grandfather passed away, leaving behind a cryptic note about the book's location, Lila knew she had to find it. Her search led her to the Athenaeum of Echoes, a place she had only read about in her grandfather's journals. The library was even more imposing than she had imagined, its towering shelves filled with books that seemed to hum with hidden knowledge. She found Elias in the darkest corner of the library, his eyes sharp and piercing as he studied her. "You've come for the book," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Lila nodded, her heart pounding. "I need to see it. My grandfather, he spent his life searching for it. I have to know why." Elias studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "The book is not what you think. It doesn't just erase memories. It consumes them. Once you read it, there's no going back. Are you prepared to face that?" Lila hesitated, then nodded. "I have to know." Elias led her to the glass case, its surface covered in a thin layer of dust. Inside was the lexicon of Lethe, its cracked leather cover seeming to pulse faintly in the dim light. Elias unlocked the case and handed the book to Lila, his hands trembling slightly. "Be careful," he warned. "The book chooses what to take. You may not like what it leaves behind." Lila opened the book, its pages crackling softly as she turned them. The text was written in a language she didn't recognize, its symbols swirling and shifting as if alive. As she read, she felt a strange sensation, as if something were pulling at the edges of her mind. Images began to flash before her eyes, memories but not her own. She saw a man, his face twisted in agony, tearing at his hair as he screamed into the void. She saw a woman, her eyes hollow, clutching a child who faded into mist in her arms. She saw a boy, no older than 10, standing alone in a field of ash, his face blank and empty. Then the memories shifted and she saw herself. But it was not the self she knew. This version of her was older, her face lined with sorrow, her eyes filled with a darkness that made her stomach churn. She watched as this other Lila raised a knife, her hands trembling, and plunged it into the chest of a man she did not recognize. The man's eyes met hers, filled with betrayal, and then he was gone, dissolving into nothingness. Lila stumbled back, her heart racing. The images faded, but the feeling of dread remained. She turned to Elias, her hands trembling. "What was that?" "The book shows you what you fear most," Elias replied. "It reveals the memories you've buried, the truths you've tried to forget, and once you've seen them, it takes them away." Lila's heart sank. She had come seeking answers, but the book had only given her more questions. And now she felt a strange emptiness, as if something had been taken from her. Over the following days, Lila began to notice gaps in her memory. She couldn't remember her mother's face, or the name of her first pet, or the reason she had become a scholar in the first place. The book had taken more than just the memories it had shown her. It had taken pieces of her past, leaving behind only emptiness. Desperate to undo what she had done, Lila returned to the library. She found Elias in the same dark corner, his expression grim. "I need to fix this," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to get my memories back." Elias shook his head. "The book doesn't give back what it takes. Once the memories are gone, they're gone forever." Lila's heart sank. She had hoped for a way to undo the damage, but she should have known better. The book's power was irreversible, and she would have to live with the consequences. As the days turned into weeks, Lila struggled to rebuild her life. She tried to fill the gaps in her memory with new experiences, but it was no use. The emptiness remained, a constant reminder of what she had lost. But she also began to notice something else, a sense of freedom. The memories the book had taken were not just the happy ones, but the painful ones as well. The betrayals, the losses, the regrets, they were all gone, leaving behind a blank slate. Lila realized then that the book was not just a curse, but a gift. It had taken her past, but it had also given her a chance to start anew. She could choose who she wanted to be, unburdened by the weight of her memories. The lexicon of Lethe was returned to its glass case, its power dormant once more. Elias locked it away, his expression grim. "The book is not to be taken lightly," he said. "It reveals truths, but those truths come at a cost." Lila never fully recovered from her encounter with the book. She was weaker, her spirit heavy with the weight of what she had lost. But she had no regrets. She had sought the truth, and she had found it, not in the memories the book had taken, but in the freedom it had given her. The book remained in the library, its pages waiting for the next soul brave enough to seek its power. And though its light could reveal great truths, it was also a reminder of the cost of knowledge, of the sacrifices we make for the truths we uncover, and the price we pay for the memories we lose. For in the end, the lexicon of Lethe was not just a relic of magic, but a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and the choices we make to define who we are. In the heart of a forgotten village, nestled deep within a mist-shrouded valley, there stood a statue unlike any other. Carved from black obsidian, it depicted a figure with a twisted, agonized expression, its hands raised as if in supplication or warning. The statue was ancient, older than the village itself, and it was said to hold a terrible power. Those who came too close would hear whispers, soft, insidious voices that spoke in a language long lost to time. The whispers were curses, ancient and malevolent, and they had a way of burrowing into the mind, spreading like a poison until the listener was driven to madness or worse. The villagers called it the Weeping Sentinel, and they avoided it at all costs. It stood in the center of the village square, surrounded by a circle of jagged stones, as if to contain its power. But containment was an illusion. The statue's influence seeped into the village, its curses twisting the minds of those who lingered too long in its presence. Crops withered, livestock died, and the villagers themselves grew pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow with fear. Yet no one dared to destroy the statue. It was said that to harm it would unleash its full wrath, and the consequences would be unimaginable. The story begins with a young man named Kyle, who had returned to the village after years of living in the city. He had come back to care for his ailing father, a farmer who had spent his life toiling in the shadow of the Weeping Sentinel. Kyle had always been a curious and headstrong child, and his time in the city had only deepened his thirst for knowledge. When he heard the whispers of the statue, he was immediately intrigued. His father, however, was less enthusiastic. "That statue is not to be trifled with," he warned, his voice trembling with age and exhaustion. "It's cursed, boy. Stay away from it." But Cal was undeterred. He had always been fascinated by the idea of curses and ancient magic, and the statue seemed like the ultimate mystery. He had to know more. One night when the moon was full and the village was asleep, Cal made his way to the village square. The statue loomed before him, its obsidian surface gleaming in the pale light. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath his feet was cracked and barren. He approached the statue cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. As he drew closer, he heard it, the whispers. They were soft at first, barely audible, but they grew louder with each step. The voices were guttural and alien, their words incomprehensible but their tone unmistakably malevolent. Kyle felt a chill run down his spine, but he pressed on, his curiosity overpowering his fear. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface of the statue. The moment he made contact, the whispers erupted into a cacophony, their voices screaming in his mind. He saw flashes of images, ancient rituals, blood sacrifices, and a figure cloaked in shadows, chanting in a language that made his skin crawl. Then the visions faded, and Cale stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers were gone, but the feeling of dread remained. He knew then that the statue was more than just a cursed relic. It was a gateway to something ancient and terrible. Over the following days, Cale began to notice changes in himself. His dreams were filled with nightmares, his waking hours plagued by paranoia. The whispers returned, softer now but no less insidious, and he found himself drawn to the statue, unable to resist its pull. The villagers noticed the change in him. They avoided him, their eyes filled with fear and suspicion. Even his father seemed distant, as if he no longer recognized his son. Kyle felt a growing sense of isolation, but he couldn't bring himself to care. The statue had awakened something in him, a hunger for knowledge, a thirst for power, and he couldn't turn away. Desperate to understand the statue's power, Cale sought out the village elder, a wizened woman named Marin. She was the keeper of the village's stories, and if anyone knew the truth about the Weeping Sentinel, it was her. Marin listened to Cale's story, her expression grim. "The statue is a relic of an ancient civilization," she said. "A people who dabbled in dark magic and paid the price. They created the statue as a vessel for their curses, a way to ensure their enemies would suffer for eternity. But the curses were too powerful, even for them. The civilization fell, and the statue was left behind, a reminder of their folly." "How do I stop it?" Cale asked, his voice desperate. Marin hesitated, then said, "The statue's power is tied to the land. To destroy it, you must break its connection, but doing so will come at a cost. The curses will be unleashed, and you will bear the brunt of their wrath." Cale's heart sank. He had hoped for an easy answer, but he should have known better. The statue's power was not to be taken lightly, and the cost of breaking it would be great. That night, Cale returned to the statue, his resolve unwavering. He carried with him a hammer and chisel, tools he had borrowed from the village blacksmith. The whispers grew louder as he approached, their voices screaming in his mind, but he pushed through the pain, his determination overpowering his fear. He placed the chisel against the base of the statue and raised the hammer. The moment he struck, the ground beneath him shook, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. The statue's surface cracked, and a dark, oily substance began to seep from the fissures. The whispers erupted into a cacophony, their voices screaming in his mind, and Cale felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something were tearing him apart. But he didn't stop. He struck again and again, each blow weakening the statue's connection to the land. The cracks spread, and the dark substance flowed freely, pooling at his feet. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, until they reached a fever pitch. Then, with a final blow, the statue shattered. The silence that followed was deafening. The whispers were gone, the air still and heavy. Kyle fell to his knees, his body racked with pain. The dark substance pooled around him, its surface rippling as if alive. He felt a strange sensation, as if the curses were seeping into him, their power consuming him from within. But he also felt something else, a sense of relief. The statue was gone, its power broken. The village was free. The villagers emerged from their homes, their faces pale with fear and awe. They gathered around Kale, their eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. They knew the cost of what he had done, and they mourned for him. Cal's father approached, his eyes filled with tears. "You've saved us," he said, his voice trembling. "But at what cost?" Cal smiled weakly. "It was worth it." The statue's remnants were gathered and buried deep within the earth, its power sealed away for eternity. The village began to heal, the land growing fertile once more, and the villagers' spirits lifting. But Cal was forever changed. The curses had taken their toll, and he bore their mark, a darkness in his eyes, a heaviness in his step. Yet he had no regrets. He had faced the statue's power and emerged victorious, not just for himself, but for the village he loved. And though the cost had been great, he knew it was worth it. For in the end, the weeping sentinel was not just a curse, but a reminder of the power of courage, sacrifice, and the enduring human spirit. And as long as its story was told, its legacy would endure, a testament to the choices we make and the burdens we bear for those we love. In a secluded valley surrounded by towering snow-capped mountains, there existed a garden unlike any other. Known as the Frost Bloom Garden, it was a place of ethereal beauty and mystery. While most gardens lay dormant under a blanket of snow during the winter months, this one came alive. Its flowers bloomed in vibrant hues of blue, silver, and white, their petals shimmering like frost under the pale winter sun. The air was filled with the delicate scent of snowdrops and winter roses, and the ground sparkled as if dusted with diamonds. But the garden's beauty was not its only wonder. It was said that the flowers held a magical power, a power to heal, to reveal truths, and to grant wishes. However, the garden was not without its secrets, and those who entered it often found themselves changed in ways they could not have imagined. The garden was tended by a solitary figure, an enigmatic woman named Serene. She was as much a part of the garden as the flowers themselves, her presence as timeless as the winter frost. Serene rarely spoke, but her eyes held a depth of knowledge that suggested she had seen centuries come and go. The villagers who lived in the valley revered her, calling her the keeper of Frostbloom, but they also feared her. For while the garden was a place of wonder, it was also a place of trials. Those who entered seeking its magic often found that the garden demanded a price, a piece of their soul, a memory, or a promise. The story begins with a young woman named Alara, who had grown up hearing tales of the Frostbloom Garden. Her grandmother, a wise and gentle woman, had often spoken of it, her words painting vivid pictures of its icy beauty and the mysteries it held. Alara had always been fascinated by the garden, but she had never seen it. The valley was difficult to reach, and the journey was fraught with danger. But when her younger brother Finn fell ill with a sickness that no healer could cure, Alara's thoughts turned to the garden. She had heard stories of its healing powers, and she knew she had to try. One cold winter morning, Alara set out for the valley. The journey was long and arduous, the path obscured by snow and ice. The wind howled through the mountains, biting at her skin, but she pressed on, her determination unwavering. When she finally reached the valley, she was struck by its beauty. The snow-covered landscape glistened under the pale sun, and the air was filled with the faint, sweet scent of winter blooms. At the center of the valley stood the garden, its flowers glowing softly in the dim light. Alara approached cautiously, her heart pounding with a mixture of awe and fear. As she stepped through the wrought iron gate, she felt a strange sensation, as if the garden itself were aware of her presence. Selene appeared as if from nowhere, her figure cloaked in a gown of silver and white. Her eyes, a piercing shade of blue, studied Alara with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Why have you come?" she asked, her voice as soft as the falling snow. "My brother is dying," Alara replied, her voice trembling. "I've heard that your garden can heal. Please, I'll do anything to save him." Selene's expression softened, but her eyes remained guarded. The garden's power is not given freely. To receive its gift, you must give something in return. Are you prepared to pay the price? Alara hesitated, then nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." Selene led Alara deeper into the garden, the flowers parting as if to make way for them. The air grew colder. The scent of winter blooms more intense. They stopped before a flower unlike any Alara had ever seen. A single bloom, its petals a deep, shimmering blue. It pulsed faintly as if alive, and Alara felt a strange pull, as if the flower were calling to her. "This is the frost bloom," Selene said. "It holds the power to heal, but it also reveals truths. To use it, you must face what lies within your heart. Are you ready?" Alara took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "I'm ready." She reached out and touched the flower, its petals cold against her skin. The moment she made contact, the world around her dissolved, replaced by a swirling void of light and shadow. She felt herself being pulled forward, as if by an unseen force, until she was standing in a place she did not recognize. It was a winter landscape, but unlike any she had ever seen. The snow was a deep, crystalline blue, and the sky was filled with swirling auroras. In the distance, she saw a figure, a young boy no older than Finn, standing alone in the snow. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Alara," he said, his voice trembling, "I'm scared." Alara's heart ached. She knew this was Finn, but it was also a part of herself, a reflection of her fears, her doubts, her regrets. She approached him cautiously, her hands trembling. "It's going to be okay," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm here." The boy smiled, his expression filled with relief, and then he was gone, dissolving into the snow. The vision faded, and Alara was back in the garden, the frost bloom glowing softly in her hand. Selene studied her, her expression unreadable. "You have faced your fear," she said. "The garden has granted its gift, but remember, the price must still be paid." Alara nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had seen. She knew the garden had taken something from her, a memory, a piece of her soul, but she also knew it was worth it. She had saved Finn, and that was all that mattered. When Alara returned home, she found Finn sitting up in bed, his color restored and his eyes bright with life. He smiled at her, his expression filled with gratitude. "You saved me," he said, his voice weak but steady. Alara's heart swelled with relief. The garden had worked. Finn was healed. But as the days passed, Alara began to notice changes in herself. She felt a strange emptiness, as if something had been taken from her. She couldn't remember her mother's face, or the sound of her father's voice, or the reason she had become a healer in the first place. The garden had taken more than just a memory. It had taken pieces of her past, leaving behind only emptiness. Yet she also felt a sense of peace. The garden had shown her the truth, and she had faced it with courage. She had saved Finn, and that was enough. The frost bloom garden remained in the valley, its flowers blooming only in winter, their beauty a reminder of the magic that still existed in the world. Selene continued to tend to it, her presence as timeless as the frost. And though the garden's power came with a price, it was also a gift, a reminder of the power of love, sacrifice, and the enduring human spirit. Alara never forgot her journey to the garden, and though the cost had, In the heart of a crumbling, ivy-covered mansion on the edge of a sleepy town, there lived a ghost named Arya. She was no ordinary ghost. While most spirits were bound to places or objects, Arya was bound to music, specifically to songs that had been forgotten by the world. Her existence was a melody without a listener, a verse without a voice, a haunting refrain that echoed through the empty halls of the mansion. She was the ghost of forgotten songs, and her story was as tragic as it was beautiful. Arya had once been a singer, her voice renowned throughout the land. She had performed in grand theaters and humble taverns alike, her songs weaving tales of love, loss, and longing. But her fame had come at a cost. She had poured her soul into her music, and when her voice faded and her songs were no longer sung, she had faded too. Yet she could not move on. Her spirit lingered, tethered to the melodies that had defined her life. The mansion, once a vibrant hub of music and laughter, had fallen into disrepair. Its grand piano was covered in dust, its strings rusted and broken. The sheet music that had once filled its halls had yellowed with age, the notes fading into obscurity. But Arya remained, her presence felt in the faint strains of music that drifted through the air on quiet nights. The townsfolk whispered of her, calling her the songbird ghost, and few dared to venture near the mansion. One day, a young musician named Elias arrived in the town. He was a wanderer, carrying nothing but his violin and a heart full of dreams. He had heard the legends of the songbird ghost and was determined to uncover the truth. Music was his life, and the idea of forgotten songs resonated deeply with him. He believed that every melody, no matter how old or obscure, deserved to be heard. Elias approached the mansion with a mix of trepidation and excitement. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood, and the silence was almost oppressive. But as he stepped inside, he heard it, a faint, haunting melody that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was a song he had never heard before, yet it felt familiar, as if it had been waiting for him all along. He followed the music through the labyrinthine halls, his violin clutched tightly in his hand. The melody grew louder, more intricate, until he found himself in a grand ballroom. The room was bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, and in the center stood a figure, a woman, her form translucent and shimmering like mist. She was singing, her voice a blend of sorrow and beauty that brought tears to Elias's eyes. When the song ended, the ghost turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and longing. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice echoing like a distant memory. "I'm Elia," he replied, his voice trembling. "I'm a musician. I heard your song, and I had to find you." Arya smiled, a bittersweet expression that spoke of centuries of loneliness. "You are the first to listen in a very long time." Over the following days, Elias and Arya formed an unlikely bond. He would visit the mansion every evening, his violin in hand, and they would play together. Arya's voice, though ethereal, was as powerful as ever, and Elias's violin added a new dimension to her songs. Together, they brought the forgotten melodies to life, filling the mansion with music once more. But as their friendship deepened, Elias began to notice something strange. The more they played, the more Arya's form seemed to solidify. Her voice grew stronger, her presence more tangible. It was as if the music was restoring her, piece by piece. Yet there was a sadness in her eyes that Elias couldn't ignore. One night, as they sat by the grand piano, Arya finally shared her story. She told him of her life as a singer, of the songs she had written and the love she had lost. She spoke of the moment she realized her music was fading into obscurity, and how her spirit had become trapped in the mansion, bound to the forgotten songs. "I thought I would be here forever," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now with you, I feel like I might finally be free." Elias's heart ached for her. "What can I do to help you?" Arya looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. You must play my songs, not just here, but out in the world. Let them be heard again, and perhaps my spirit can find peace. Elias vowed to fulfill her wish. He spent weeks transcribing Aria's songs, his fingers aching as he worked tirelessly to capture every note, every lyric. When he was finally ready, he left the mansion and began to perform her music in the town square, in taverns and at festivals. The songs, once forgotten, began to spread like wildfire. People were captivated by their beauty, and soon Aria's melodies were on everyone's lips. As the songs gained popularity, Elias noticed a change in the mansion. The air grew lighter, the shadows less oppressive, and one night when he returned to the ballroom, Aria was gone. But her presence lingered in the music, in the notes that now filled the world. Elias knew that Aria had found her peace. Her songs, once forgotten, had been given new life, and with them, her spirit had been set free. But he also knew that her legacy would live on, not just in the music, but in the hearts of those who heard it. Years passed and Elias became a renowned musician, known for his hauntingly beautiful melodies. But he never forgot Aria. He would often return to the mansion, now a place of pilgrimage for musicians and music lovers alike. And though Aria was no longer there, her songs echoed through its halls, a reminder of the ghost who had haunted forgotten songs and the musician who had given them new life. And so the legend of the songbird ghost lived on, not as a tale of sorrow, but as a testament to the power of music and the enduring spirit of those who create it. For in the end, Aria had not just been a ghost, she had been a melody, a verse, a refrain that would never be forgotten. In the heart of the sprawling, labyrinthine city of Veridon, where the streets were alive with the hum of activity and the air was thick with the scent of street food and incense, there existed a market unlike any other. Known as the Phantom Market, it was a place of mystery and intrigue, its stalls filled with curiosities that defied explanation. Ancient artifacts, strange trinkets, and items that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. But what set the Phantom Market apart from other markets was its currency, memories. Here, memories were traded like goods, bought and sold by those who sought to forget or to remember. The market was said to appear only on the nights of the new moon, when the sky was at its darkest and the veil between worlds was thinnest. It was a place of shadows and whispers, where the boundaries between reality and illusion blurred. The stalls were manned by figures cloaked in darkness, their faces hidden beneath hoods and masks. They spoke in low, melodic tones, their voices carrying the weight of centuries. Among the city's inhabitants was a young woman named Alara, a historian and folklorist who had dedicated her life to uncovering the secrets of Veridon. Alara had always been fascinated by the tales of the Phantom Market, her imagination captivated by the idea of a place where memories could be traded. She had spent years researching the market, poring over old texts and interviewing those who claimed to have visited it. But despite her efforts, the truth behind the market remained elusive. One evening, as the new moon rose and the city was bathed in darkness, Alara felt a strange pull, a sense that the Phantom Market was near. She made her way to the outskirts of the city, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the sound of distant whispers. She pushed open a creaking gate and stepped inside, her breath catching at the sight before her. The market was even more beautiful than she had imagined, its stalls lit by lanterns that glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light. The air was filled with the scent of spices and the sound of low, melodic chanting. Alara wandered through the stalls, her fingers brushing against the curiosities on display. She saw jars filled with swirling colored smoke, each one labeled with a name and a date. She saw mirrors that reflected not the present, but the past, their surfaces rippling with images of long-forgotten events. And then she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. a stall filled with memories, each one contained within a small glass vial. The stall was manned by a figure cloaked in darkness, their face hidden beneath a hood. They spoke in a low, melodic voice, their words carrying the weight of centuries. "Welcome, traveler," they said. "What memories do you seek?" Ilara's mind raced. She knew that the market was a place of danger, where the boundaries between reality and illusion blurred. But she also knew that it was a place of opportunity, where the secrets of the past could be uncovered. She approached the stall, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. "I seek the memory of my mother," she said, her voice trembling. "She died when I was young, and I have only vague recollections of her. I want to remember her, to see her face again." The figure nodded, their expression hidden beneath the hood. They said, "The memory of a loved one is a precious thing," they said, "but it comes at a cost. What are you willing to trade?" Ilara hesitated, her mind racing. She knew that the market traded in memories, that the cost of one memory was another. But what memory could she part with? What part of herself was she willing to lose? "I will trade the memory of my first love," she said, her voice steady. "It is a memory that brings me pain, a memory I would rather forget." The figure nodded, their expression hidden beneath the hood. They reached into the stall and pulled out a small glass vial filled with swirling, colored smoke. "This is the memory of your mother," they said. "Take it, and the memory of your first love will be gone." Ilara took the vial, her fingers trembling as she held it up to the light. She felt a surge of energy, a force that seemed to flow through her, filling her with a sense of power and vitality. But as the energy coursed through her, she also felt something else, a deep, aching sadness that seemed to come from within. It was as if the memory of her first love had been a part of her, a part that had been waiting to be set free. Ilara returned to the city, her heart heavy but her spirit lighter, knowing that she had found the memory of her mother. But as the days turned into weeks, she began to notice something strange. The world around her seemed to lose its color, its vibrancy. The laughter of children, the warmth of the sun, the beauty of the stars, all of it seemed dull and lifeless. She realized that the memory of her first love had been a part of her, a part that had brought her joy and happiness. But Ilara was determined to see her mother again, to hold her in her arms and tell her how much she loved her. She knew that the memory was her only hope, her only chance to bring her back. And so she continued to hold on to the vial, even as the world around her grew darker and colder. One night, as Ilara sat by the fire, she felt a strange pull, a sense that her mother was near. She closed her eyes and focused on her, on the memory of her smile, the sound of her laughter. And then she saw her, standing before her, her form faint and translucent, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and sorrow. "Ilara," she whispered, her voice soft and trembling, "why have you done this? Why have you cursed yourself for me?" Tears streamed down Ilara's face as she reached out to her fingers brushing against her cold, ethereal form. "I couldn't let you go," she said. "I couldn't live without you." Her mother's gaze grew distant, as if she were looking into a past that Ilara could not see. "The memory has cursed you," she said. "It has taken your happiness, your joy. You must let it go, Ilara. You must let me go." Ilara's heart broke as she watched her, the weight of her regret crushing her. She had thought that the memory would bring her closer to her mother, but instead it had only driven them further apart. She knew that she had to let go of the memory, to break the curse and set herself free. With a heavy heart, Ilara reached for the vial, her fingers trembling as she held it up to the light. She felt a surge of energy, a force that seemed to flow through her, filling her with a sense of peace and clarity. The world around her seemed to come alive, its colors vibrant and its sounds clear. But as the memory of her mother began to fade, her form dissolving into the air, Ilara reached out to her heart pounding with a mixture of love and sorrow. "I will always love you," she whispered, her voice trembling. And then she was gone, her presence a memory that would haunt Ilara for the rest of her days. Ilara stood there for a long time, her heart heavy but her spirit lighter, knowing that she had done the right thing. She knew that the memory was a curse, a tool that could only bring pain and sorrow. And though she would always miss her mother, she knew that she had to live her life, to find joy and happiness in the world around her. The Phantom Market remained a place of mystery and fear, a destination for those seeking answers to questions best left unasked. But for Ilara, it was more than just a market. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a chance for redemption. And as she walked away from the market, she knew that she would carry its light with her, a reminder of the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of curses. In a small, dusty workshop tucked away in the corner of a forgotten village, there lived a puppet named Pin. He was no ordinary puppet. Carved from the finest mahogany by a master craftsman long since passed, Pin was a marvel of artistry. His joints moved with a fluid grace, his painted eyes sparkled with an uncanny, lifelike quality, and his mouth, though fixed in a permanent smile, seemed to hold secrets. But Pin was not content with being a mere puppet. He dreamed of becoming human. This dream was not born of vanity or a desire for fame. Pin had spent years observing the humans who visited the workshop, children with their wide-eyed wonder, lovers whispering sweet nothings, and elders sharing stories by the fire. He envied their ability to feel, to love, to experience the world in ways he could only imagine. He longed to know what it was like to feel the warmth of the sun on his skin, to taste the sweetness of an apple, to laugh until his sides ached. But most of all, he longed to be free, to walk out of the workshop and into the world, unbound by strings and the whims of others. Pin's creator, an old man named Elias, had been kind but distant. He had poured his heart into crafting Pin, but he had never treated him as anything more than a puppet. When Elias passed away, the workshop fell silent and Pin was left alone with his dreams. For years he sat on a shelf, gathering dust, watching the world through the grimy window. But then, one fateful day, everything changed. A young woman named Clara stumbled upon the workshop. She was a traveler, wandering the countryside in search of inspiration for her stories. When she saw Pin, she was captivated. "You're beautiful," she whispered, brushing the dust from his face. "But you look so sad. What's wrong?" Pin, of course, could not speak. But something about Clara's presence stirred a strange sensation within him, a flicker of hope. Clara, sensing his longing, decided to take him with her. "Maybe you just need to see the world," she said, placing him gently in her bag. And so Pin's journey began. Clara was a storyteller, and she carried Pin with her wherever she went. She would sit by campfires or in bustling taverns, weaving tales of adventure and magic, while Pin listened intently. Through her stories, he learned about the world beyond the workshop, the vast oceans, towering mountains, and bustling cities. He learned about love and loss, courage and fear, joy and sorrow. And with each story, his desire to become human grew stronger. One night, as Clara slept under a canopy of stars, Pin felt a strange sensation. His wooden body, which had always been stiff and unyielding, seemed to soften. His fingers twitched, and for the first time, he moved without strings. Startled, he looked down at his hands and saw that they were no longer made of wood. They were flesh and blood. Pin's heart, or what he imagined to be his heart, pounded in his chest. He stood, his legs trembling, and took his first step. It was clumsy and awkward, but it was his. He was free. But the transformation was not complete. By morning, Pin had reverted to his puppet form. Clara, unaware of what had happened, packed up camp and continued on her journey. Pin, now more determined than ever, vowed to find a way to make the change permanent. Clara's travels eventually led them to a mysterious forest known as the Whispering Woods. It was said that the forest was home to ancient magic, and that those who entered with a pure heart could have their deepest wishes granted. Pin, though skeptical, felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this was the answer he had been searching for. The forest was unlike anything Pin had ever seen. The trees seemed to hum with life, their leaves shimmering in hues of gold and silver. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers, and the ground beneath their feet was soft and warm. As they ventured deeper, they encountered strange creatures, talking animals, glowing fairies, and even a tree that offered them advice in a voice like rustling leaves. Finally, they reached the heart of the forest, where a great oak tree stood. Its branches stretched high into the sky, and its roots twisted deep into the earth. At its base was a pool of water, its surface smooth as glass. "This is the pool of reflection," said a voice. Pin and Clara turned to see an old woman, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp and wise. "It grants the deepest desires of those who gaze into it. But beware, the price is steep." Pin stepped forward, his wooden feet clicking against the ground. "I want to be human," he said, his voice trembling. "I want to feel, to love, to live." The old woman studied him for a long moment. "And what are you willing to give up for this wish?" Pin hesitated. He had nothing to give but his own existence. "I would give anything," he said finally. The old woman nodded. "Then look into the pool." Pin approached the pool and gazed into its depths. The water shimmered, and he saw himself reflected, not as a puppet, but as a human. His heart swelled with hope. But then the image shifted, and he saw Clara, her face filled with sorrow. He saw the workshop, now empty and lifeless. He saw the stories he had loved, fading into nothingness. The old woman's voice echoed in his mind. "To become human, you must give up what makes you unique. Your immortality, your craftsmanship, your very essence. Are you prepared to lose yourself to gain humanity?" Pin's heart ached. He had spent so long dreaming of becoming human, but now he realized that his journey had given him something precious, a connection to Clara, to the stories, to the world. To give that up would be to lose everything. In the end, Pin made his choice. He stepped back from the pool and turned to Clara. "I don't want to be human," he said. "Not if it means losing who I am." Clara smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You've always been more than a puppet, Pin. You have a heart, even if it's made of wood." The old woman nodded approvingly. "Wisdom is the first step to true humanity. Perhaps you are already more human than you realize." As they left the forest, Pin felt a sense of peace. He would never be human, but that no longer mattered. He had found something far more valuable, a place in the world, a purpose, and a friend who saw him for who he truly was. And so, the puppet who dreamed of becoming human discovered that he didn't need to change to find happiness. He was enough, just as he was.